Today's video is brought to you by our sponsor Card Kingdom, and right now you can pre-order Zendikar Rising by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Zendikar Rising spoilers, and good lord, I think today is our busiest spoiler day yet. We have an infinite amount of really sweet, really powerful cards to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it, starting with, oh my goodness, this card. Our white modal flipland mythic, Emeria's Call and Emeria Shattered Skyclaves. So this card, oh my goodness, I don't even know what to say about it. So on one hand, Emeria's Call, it's expensive. It is 7 mana to make 2 4/4 angels with flying, and you give your non-angel creatures indestructible until your next turn. So that's fine, kind of a finisher. You're getting 8 power and toughness across 2 bodies for 7 mana. Not super efficient, but not horrible, especially since they're evasive. Most importantly, it's also a land. Emeria Shattered Skyclave, and the big deal here is you can pay 3 life to have it come into play untapped. So this is an untapped, potentially land, a bolt land, quote unquote, that's also a finisher, and I think this card is absolutely ridiculous. It is not that inefficient in its spell half. Like, if you compare it to other angel makers and treat the angels Decree of Justice, you're essentially getting the same amount of angels, non-miracled or whatever, but still the same amount of angels for 7 or 8 mana as you would with those cards. Of course, you're losing the flexibility of being able to pay a bigger X cost and treat the angels Decree of Justice. You can pay 10 mana, 11 mana, get an extra angel out of the deal. However, you're gaining the upside of it being a land. Like, this is in your land slot. When you think about how this works, picture Azorius Control. And this is just random Azorius Control deck. I know some of the cards are rotating, but if you look at this deck list, you'll see 4 basic planes in this deck. Actually, 5 basic planes. There's one hiding over with Castle Vantress. So you got 5 basic planes in the deck. The power of this card, Emeria's Call, is it's taking up a land slot. You can take and remove 4 basic planes from your deck. Instead, play 4 Emeria Skyclave, and you're essentially plus 4 spells in your deck. That is 4, not just spells, but powerful finishing spells for your control deck, and you're getting these essentially for free as far as opportunity cost is concerned. Like, that's what makes this so powerful. I feel like people are not grasping the power of these cards, like they're not taking up a spell slot in your deck. And what this means is, as you're playing your game of Magic, and you're drawing your cards, you're going to hit a higher concentration of real spells, and a lower concentration of lands, but you're still going to have the proper amount of lands, so you're not going to be at more risk of, like, you know, not hitting your land drops or flooding out. You're still going to have the right ratio of lands, but you're also getting these extra spells, which is absolutely absurd. I think this card is very, very strong. I almost said busted. I don't know if I want to say busted or not, but this is incredibly strong. I'm having a hard time picturing why in any sort of mid-ranger control deck that has enough basic planes in it to replace, why I wouldn't play Emeria's Call instead. Like, why would I not do that? Like, sure, 3 life, hopefully we've gotten past the fact that 3 life is not a big deal. People pay 12 shock lands in some decks that cost 2 life to come into play untapped. 1 extra life coming from this land, it is not a big deal. Like, it is really not a big deal. That is not a reason to not play this card. But seriously, I'm having a hard time figuring out why I wouldn't play this. Like, why wouldn't I want my basic planes to also be able to make me a bunch of angels in the late game that can just win me the game? Why would I not do that? Like, why wouldn't I? So I feel like it is an absolutely insane card. I expect this card to see a ton of play in Standard, play in Historic, play in Pioneer, probably play in Modern as well. Like, I could definitely picture blue-white control decks. Like, why not? What's the downside? Like, yeah, sure, maybe you gotta play a tap sometimes. That's not a huge deal. It's like a shock land, and shock lands are ultra staples in every format that they are legal in. So I feel like Emeria's Call, and if we get more of these mythic lands, are going to be absolutely powerful almost across formats. The only drawback is you do need to be heavily white to take advantage of it, because you're not getting a dual land. So this is comparable to a basic plane. So if you're playing a 3-color, 4-color, 5-color deck, and your deck doesn't have much room for lands that only tap for 1 mana, you're not going to be able to cast your spells, then Emeria's Call does lose some of its appeal. So I feel like mono-color decks, 2-color decks is where cards like this are going to shine. 3-color decks, 4-color decks, maybe you can stick in a 1-of or something, but it's going to be a lot harder just because you can't afford that many lands that only tap for 1 color of mana in an absolute sense. Same way you couldn't play a lot of basic planes in a 3 or 4 color deck. But I feel like Emeria's Call is really good, and I'm excited to see the rest of this cycle. I really feel like this mechanic is going to have a huge impact on Standard and on other formats as well. It is incredibly powerful, and I feel like people are sleeping on just how good these lands really are. I feel like they are really, like, not quite companions, but close to companion level good, where if you can put these in your deck, you need to put them in your deck, because you're going to be at disadvantage if you're playing basic planes when your opponent's playing a basic planes that can also make a bunch of angels and win at the game. So don't sleep on the power of these untapped modal flip lands. They are absolutely insane. Next up, we have another sweet white mythic, an Angel of Destiny. So Angel of Destiny, 5 mana, 2/6 flying double strike. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player gain that much life. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you were at least 15 life more than your starting life total, so in Standard 35, Commander 55, each player Angel of Destiny attack this turn loses the game. So Angel of Destiny, this card is kind of a cross between, I'd say, Baneslayer Angel and Felidar Sovereign. You get this weird alternate win condition, similar to Felidar Sovereign. Of course, in Standard, it's actually a little easier to get to. In Commander, it's harder, but still, kind of similar. Like, if you get to a certain life total, and you can attack, which is, I guess, an upside and a downside. Felidar Sovereign, you gotta wait till the upkeep. Angel of Destiny, you can win right away if you attack with it. You don't gotta wait a turn cycle, but you do have to attack with it. Mixed with kind of Baneslayer Angel, you lose the immediate lifelink of Baneslayer Angel, but you give your entire team this weird, like, if you hit your opponent lifelink. So while Angel of Destiny not going to be as good as, like, slam this against mono red, set up that wall that your opponent just can't get through because they can't attack into it, if you are attacking and have a big board of creatures, Angel of Destiny can gain you even more life than Baneslayer Angel, and a 2/6 flying double striking body is actually a pretty decent deal for 5 mana. So I think we've seen this 35 life cutoff before with the Ajani Strength of the Pride. That's how much you need to ultimate Ajani, wrath away all your opponent's stuff. Ajani, it's been okay in Standard. The life gain deck has been played, but it's certainly not a top tier deck. However, it's not that hard to get to 35 life. Even after rotation, we're still going to have Heliod, we're still going to have Daxos, we're still going to have Linden. So if you want to build a life gain deck and focus on killing people with Angel of Destiny, it seems very possible in Standard. Whether or not that's going to be good remains to be seen. My guess is the life gain deck, even with Angel of Destiny, probably remains like a second tier, kind of fun, popular, casual option, rather than a legitimate top tier threat to the format. But Angel of Destiny does seem like a perfect fit for a deck like that. The other place where I think Angel of Destiny is going to shine is in Commander. And you might not realize this, but Felidar Sovereign, it's kind of like an archetype staple in Commander. If you look at any life gain deck, it is almost always playing Felidar Sovereign. Guard Compassion, Evra, Linden, Aloro, Karlov. Yes, these are a narrow subset of decks based around gaining life, but in those decks, Felidar Sovereign is a legitimate staple. It is just like a card that you're going to put in your deck a very high percentage of the time. Of course, Angel of Destiny, it does have a drawback. Felidar Sovereign wins the game essentially at your starting life total. If somehow you could put Felidar Sovereign into play on turn 1 and just not take damage for a turn, it would win the game. You can't do that because it costs 6 mana, but you see what I'm saying. You don't have to gain any life. Angel of Destiny, you do have to get up to 55 life in Commander. However, if you're playing a life gain deck, that shouldn't be a big deal, and Angel of Destiny even helps you get there. So I think Angel of Destiny, it's a really sweet card. It is really fun. I'm excited to build around its weird attack with the game trigger. My guess is it's not a legitimate, like, competitive card in Standard, just because the archetypes that you play it in are pretty narrow. Like, Angel of Destiny being good depends on life gain being good, and while we do have a lot of good life gain pieces, traditionally the life gain deck has just not gone over the hump to be like a top tier option. But in Commander decks and in, like, fun second tier Standard decks, I think Angel of Destiny is going to be an amazing build around, and I'm super hyped for it. We also got, oh my goodness, Nighthawk Scavenger, the best vampire Nighthawk of all time. 3 mana, 1+ star 3. So 3 toughness with its power being 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyard. So reverse Tarmogoyf, flying Death Touch lifelink. So this is literally Vampire Nighthawk. I mean, its floor is pretty close to Vampire Nighthawk. Same mana cost, same toughness. Yes, it technically starts off with 1 less power, but if your opponent has any card in your graveyard, it's going to be at least a Vampire Nighthawk. And then you get the reverse Tarmogoyf ability, which Tarmogoyf, it can get up to like 7 or 8 power. Not going to do that in Standard very easily. There's no like tribal card type. But in Standard, you have what? Lands, creatures, instants, sorceries, artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers. Technically, you could hit 7 in Standard. It's probably not super likely, but even like 5 is going to be insane. Like, if your opponent has 5 card types in their graveyard, that would be what? Land, creature, instant, sorcery, planeswalker. That sounds very realistic. Nighthawk Scavenger will come down as a 6/3 flying Death Touch lifelinker, which is insane. It is an absolutely insane deal. This card is so good in Standard. I am incredibly hyped for this. Like, Vampire Nighthawk was already a good card. It was already the best limited card in his format. It already saw Standard play. This is a massive upgrade over Vampire Nighthawk. As far as seeing play in Standard, I mean, you can go the rogue route. We are getting more and more good rogues. We got Thief Guild Enforcer. We have Zarasan, which is definitely a sweet rogue payoff. Also cares about the graveyard, which is cool and works with the milling. So kind of works together if you want to play like some sort of Dimir rogue tribal or something like that. It's also a rogue to reduce party mechanics, party costs. But I don't think you need to go that direction. I think that Nighthawk Scavenger is just a really good threat for any sort of black or 2 or 3 color mid-range deck, like Mono Black Devotion. Gonna be perfect there. 2 black mana symbols, an insane threat, Karaxa mid-range style decks. Maybe there's a Nissa style deck where you're kind of just grinding out mid-range Golgari value. Nighthawk Scavenger, I think, can show up in all of those. So I think this card is like legitimately frightening, although I will say, some people have asked about Modern. I don't think it's actually good in Modern. It's probably good in Historic and also Pioneer. In Modern in specific, part of Goyf's power, I know when you see the Goyf ability, even the reverse Goyf ability, you're like, oh, it's got to be Modern playable. Part of Goyf's power is it boosts its toughness as well, so it quickly gets out of range of removal like Lightning Bolt. Nighthawk Scavenger, you're only boosting the power, which means it's always going to die to Lightning Bolt, and 3 drops that die to Lightning Bolt don't do anything right away. Probably not going to be Modern playable, but definitely Standard playable, definitely Historic playable, and possibly Pioneer playable as well. I think this card is really good, and we didn't even talk about it being a Vampire. Vampire's already a legitimate tribe in Pioneer, in Historic, so this card is just really strong all around. We also got Soul Shatter, a nice little removal spell. Soul Shatter, 3 mana, instant. Each opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures or planeswalkers they control. So this is the closest comparison I could think of was Crackling Doom, which kind of does the same thing. Each opponent has to sack a creature with the greatest power. There's not actually an edict that I could find, at least, that makes everyone sack their highest converted mana cost per minute, but that makes the card much more powerful. If you look at traditional edicts, like Diabolic Edict, they don't really see that much play in Standard and other formats as well, really, outside of trying to answer specific threats, like a Boggle or something that you just can't kill, because the problem is, your opponent always gets to sack their worst thing. Like, you Diabolic Edict, your opponent has, I don't know, a Dream Trawler, and they sacrifice their 1/1 token from Castle Ardenvale, and you just get absolutely blown out. Soul Shatter gets around that. Like, you're always theoretically getting your opponent's best thing, or at least their most expensive thing. So sure, maybe your opponent has tokens around. They can't just feed those to the Soul Shatter. They're going to lose that Dream Trawler no matter what, which is a huge boost of power for an Edict. So I think this card is actually pretty playable, especially at instant speed. You're often going to be able to trade up, getting rid of a 5-6 mana permanent for 3 mana instant speed. That is a great deal. And if you're playing Commander, you hit on everyone, which is a nice bonus as well. So very solid Edict effect that fixes kind of the traditional problem with Edict. Their opponent always gets to get rid of their worst thing. In this case, it should be their best thing, which is a huge boost in power. Next on our list, we get a little hate card, Roiling Vortex. So 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, they take 1 damage. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent on it, they take 5 damage, and you could pay 1 red mana to make it so opponents can't gain life this turn. So this card obviously looks like it was designed to be a hate card for Fires of Invention. Of course, Fires ended up getting banned before Roiling Vortex came out, although I do think this would have been a good answer if Fires was still in the format. However, even with presumably its main target being banned from the format, I still think this is a playable card. It reminds me a little bit of a fixed Sulfuric Vortex. Sulfuric Vortex, if you're not familiar with it, it is a cube all-star in mono red decks. It has seen Legacy play in mono red decks. 2 damage, each upkeep to everyone, so you're slowly losing life, making it so players can't gain life. Roiling Vortex kind of does the same thing in lesser form. You gotta spend mana to do the life gain prevention. You only get 1 damage each upkeep rather than 2, so it is slower, but I mean, it is a good, like, burn or aggro sideboard card, I think, to fight against life gain spells. The damage makes it relevant, even if your opponent doesn't have life gain. And who knows, maybe your opponent, I don't know what free spells are anymore, Force and Negation in Modern or something. I don't know what actual no mana cost spells there are that are seeing a ton of play. A lot of the free spells that we see in Standard are not, like, technically free. They're, like, immediately give your mana cost back, but you still have to pay mana on them. So I'm not sure how relevant the 5 damage free spell thing will be, but I'm sure it'll come up once in a while. But even without that doing anything, Roiling Vortex, if you're playing red aggro, burn, seems like a reasonable sideboard option to fight against life gain decks and get in a little bit extra continual damage. Next up, we have one of the sweeter demons we've seen in a while, Taborax Hope's Demise, and oh boy, this is a sweet one. 3 mana, legendary demon cleric. You get a 2/2 with flying. It has lifelink as long as it gets 5 counters on it. So you end up with a 7/7 or more lifelink eventually. And then whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you put a counter on it. If it was a cleric, you get to draw a card and lose a life. So Taborax, it starts off as like a Windrake essentially, but as your stuff dies, eventually you're going to have this huge Chancellor of the Draws or Grizzlebrand. I don't even know the best comparison, but this massive life-linking flyer is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. In Windrake, like, it's not a horrible starting point to begin with. I think this is clearly something for sacrifice decks. It actually reminds me a lot of Corvold, like mini Corvold, and I think you play them together in the same style of deck. Of course, Corvold cares about sacrificing permanents, but really, so does Taborax. I don't think you play this for the most part and just hope that your opponent, like, Doomblades your creatures and so forth. Like, that doesn't seem very realistic. I think if you're playing this, you're playing it kind of like Corvold, where you're going to be playing Woe Striders and reanimation effects and maybe Lurises and cheap things you can sacrifice and get back from the graveyard, and trying to grow this into a really big threat really quickly, similar to Corvold, along with Corvold, which seems very powerful. I mean, we've already seen sacrifice decks be powerful, and maybe Taborax might be a little window into Wizards' thinking process for banning Cauldron Familiar. It might be that Taborax, with Cauldron Familiar and the sacrifice deck already being really good, would have just pushed it over the top and made it insane. Can you imagine a 3-mana Corvold in the sacrifice deck that was already one of the best decks in the format with 5-mana Corvold? I'm glad we don't have to deal with that. Otherwise, in Commander, you got some sweet shenanigans there as well. Like, you can easily make Taborax infinitely big. Let's say, easiest combo I could come up with, Phyrexian Altar, Gravecrawler, any zombie. You just take in, sacrifice Gravecrawler, get 1 mana from Phyrexian Altar, use that mana to recast Gravecrawler, sacrifice it again, do it again, do it again, do it again, grow your Taborax into a 1,000,000 power Taborax, attack your opponent, kill someone, gain 1,000,000 life so your other opponents can't kill you, and you can do this as early as what, turn 4? Something like turn 1 Gravecrawler, turn 2 zombie, turn 3 Taborax, turn 4 Phyrexian Altar, start the sacrifice loop, win the game on the spot. Well, kill opponent on the spot. You can't kill everyone, but still, you essentially win the game on the spot. So sweet Commander shenanigans as well, and worth pointing out, you play Taborax as your commander if you want to, since it's a legend. Also, we're getting more and more clerics. I was skeptical heading into spoiler season if there would be enough to matter, but Taborax, it seems perfect with, like, Aura. You can do these really sweet value loops, like throw your Woe Strider in there, sacrifice a expensive cleric, like Drana maybe, to get back a cheaper cleric, like Demon's Disciple, then sacrifice that, all along the way growing your Taborax into this massive threat, and drawing a bunch of cards as you go through these loops. So maybe clerics can actually work in Standard. We're getting a nice curve, more and more pieces for the deck. It's also worth mentioning that Taborax, it's kind of more efficient than we usually see this effect. If you look at other recent black flyers that grow whenever one of our creatures die, I guess Taborax does have the non-token downside, but still, close enough. Scavenger Drake, the most efficient one, a 1/1 for 4. Mausoleum Harpy, a 3/3 for 5. Taborax, at 3 mana with this effect, is very competitively costed compared to past versions. So I think Taborax, it's a really good card. I do think you need to be a sacrifice deck, or something with sacrifice synergies. I don't think you just run this out and hope that things die naturally. That's probably not going to be good enough, but in a sacrifice themed deck, there is some combo potential in Commander. It's Standard, sacrifice is already really good. Taborax seems like it should easily have a home in those decks. We also got an equipment, Maul of the Skyclaves. And Maul of the Skyclaves, it's interesting. So we've gotten a glimpse at how Wizards is trying to fix equipment or make them more playable. So Maul of the Skyclaves, 3 mana, When it enters a battlefield, you can attach it to a creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, flying in first strike, and then it's 4 to equip. So basically, Maul the Skyclaves, it has a fairly expensive equip cost. It has a reasonable mana cost. So essentially how I view this is Wizards is kind of making the equipment from Zendikar Rising into like weird pump spells is what I would consider them. So like consider Maul the Skyclaves compared to something like Sarah's Embrace, an Aura, or Spontaneous Flight, just a straight up instant speed pump spell. Maul the Skyclaves, it has some downsides. Like it is a sorcery speed effect. So you can't do it as a combat trick like Spontaneous Flight. However, it has some really big upsides, which is, yes, you get this first equip for free. So essentially, you're paying for a sorcery speed Spontaneous Flight, and then you have the upside that maybe your creature dies, maybe you got nothing going on. Yes, the equip cost is high, but you can move it around later in the game. Is this enough to make equipment playable without being broken? I don't know, but that's, I think, how you view these new Zendikar Rising equipment, because that seems to be the theme for all of them. They all come into a play and equip to a creature you control, and then they all have what I would consider to be overcosted equip costs. So you get that one equip for free, but then if you want to put Ravager's Mace, Bidecarver, Maul the Skyclaves on another creature, you're going to have to pay that price. So is this going to make equipment playable? We'll have to wait and see. It is a boost of power, being able to use them like a weird sorcery speed combat trick almost, or a pump spell, a sorcery speed pump spell immediately. That is a nice boost of power for aggro decks. On the other hand, they are very clunky to move around, which is something worth keeping in mind. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. We do have reasons to play equipment like Nahiri, other equipment synergies. That gives them a boost of power as well. So interesting take on equipment in Battle for Zendikar. Next on our list, we have Gate Stormcaller, a blue mythic from the set. 2 mana, human wizard, you get a 2/1 with kicker of 5. When it enters the battlefield, copy the next instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 2 or less that you cast this turn. So essentially play this. Cast an instant or sorcery 2 or less, get to copy it. However, if you kick it, you get to copy that spell twice instead of once. So what do you do with Gate Stormcaller? On one hand, it is relatively safe thanks to that 2 CMC or less restriction. You can't do anything super duper busted. On the other hand, this is really efficient for a spell copying effect. Only 2 mana on a 2/1 body that's already on curve. Those are like Snapcaster stats, essentially, which is a pretty playable body. So on one hand, I mean, obviously, you can play this and cast an Opt, or a Frantic Inventory, or a removal spell like Grasp of Darkness, Petty Thief, and double those up. That's already good value. Like Gate Stormcaller into Opt, you're essentially getting 2 Opts and a 2/1 body. That's a good deal. It's kind of like a Snapcaster that you have to play before the spell and only works with cheap spells. So I think that by itself just makes this a pretty good card. Like Gate Stormcaller, double up a card draw spell, removal spell. That's already a powerful effect. However, you can do some shenanigans with Kicker. Kicker is probably the best way, in Standard at least, to take advantage of this, because if you copy a Kicker spell that was kicked, you still get to copy the Kicker. So let's say you have Inscription of Abundance. You see Gate Stormcaller, you kick Inscription, you're going to get all the modes on it 2 times, or blink of an eye. It's only 2 mana, you can kick it for 2 more, bounce something and draw a card. Well, you bounce 2 things, draw 2 cards, because the kicker carries over as well. So not only is this a kicker card, it works well with other kicker cards. So I think that Gate Stormcaller, it's pretty powerful. Not a whole lot to say about it. It's just efficient. What it does is pretty powerful. If you got a bunch of cheap spells in your deck, this feels like a good addition, and you can get even more value by embracing the kickeriness to get around that 2 CMC restriction. We also got Valakut Exploration, and I think this card's actually really strong. 3 mana, landfall. When a land enters a battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card as long as it remains exiled. So as long as you make a land drop, you're drawing an extra card each turn. And then at the beginning of your end step, if there are 1 or more cards exiled with it, you put those cards in their owner's graveyard and deal that much damage to each opponent. So let's say you got a couple cards under it somehow, thanks to shenanigans. You don't cast those, you mill those, you get to damage your opponent. So this is just very efficiently costed. Like, the drawback is you do need to hit lands. Like, if you don't have a land, this isn't going to draw you a card, but compared to like Vance's Blasting Cannon, Chandra's, these other red card draw permanents where you get to exile a card and play it this turn, Valakut's Exploration is cheaper than most. It also can let you play lands, so you can kind of snowball it that way. And remember, because it's a landfall trigger, yes, the downside is maybe you don't have a land and you don't get to draw a card that turn. The upside is you can potentially have multiple lands come into play in a turn and draw multiple cards, like fetch lands in Arid Mesa or in standard Fabled Passage. That's 2 landfall triggers. That's 2 cards exiled with Valakut's Exploration you can play. Cultivates, Migration Pass, Azusas. So anything that lets you have extra land drops, extra landfall triggers, can really power this up. If you want to go really deep, I don't even know where you do this because it's not legal in most formats, but Fast Spawn lets you play any number of lands. You got to take a damage for it. So if you can keep snowballing lands with Valakut's Exploration into Fast Spawn, keep playing them, keep playing them, keep playing them, go through a huge chunk of your deck, I guess in like Cube Draft Vintage, although that's probably not going to be a thing in Vintage. It also has the potential to kind of combo kill like old school Valakut. It definitely takes more work, but let's say you get down Valakut's Exploration, then you scape shift, sack all your lands, get a bunch of new lands, you're going to get like 8, 10 landfall triggers, and then intentionally just don't cast anything. Those cards are all going to go to your graveyard. You're going to 10 each opponent, so you can kind of set up this weird Valakut-y scape shift style kill as well. So I think this card is just really good, even without extra land drop shenanigans to really power it up. Most of the time, in a commander deck or in a standard deck, you're going to be drawing extra card each turn as you hit your land drops, which is already powerful in a 3-mana enchantment, and then you get all this extra upside where you could potentially be drawing extra cards each turn. So I think this card is just going to be solid in standard, in commander, might even have a slight chance in older formats as well as like a sideboard card or something. Being enchantment, it is traditionally hard to remove, although getting less hard, but Valakut's Exploration, definitely powerful. We also got a creature land in Crawling Barrens. So Crawling Barrens taps for a colorless, comes into play untapped, which is big. You can pay for, put 2 counters on it, and then you can have Crawling Barrens become a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn it's still a land. So essentially, this is like a hybrid of Mobilized District and Raging Ravine, I'd say. Biggest upside, comes into play untapped. Downside, obviously, colorless mana. The other thing I like about this card is it starts off slow. It's only a 2/2 the first time you activate it, which is not very exciting. However, it does grow very quickly. The second time it's a 4/4, the third time it's a 6/6, and then you're already on par with Raging Ravine, and then it gets better from there, and it's important to note, you can activate it multiple times in a turn. Like Raging Ravine has this ability that when it attacks, it grows. Crawling Barrens, let's say you have 8 mana, there's no reason you can't activate it twice in a turn. You only get the creature part of it once, but you're going to get those extra counters to make it a bigger threat. So I think this is a pretty solid creature land for standard decks that can play it. I don't think it's going to show up too much in older formats just because 4 is a lot to activate, and starting off with only 2 counters is a little risky, does die to a lot of removal, but a potentially powerful creature land, as we've seen with Mobilized District, which has been a very good card at various times. You give up the upside of getting cheaper if you have a bunch of legends on the battlefield, but you gain the upside of Crawling Barrens becoming an even bigger, scarier threat if you can activate it a few times. So definitely a solid creature land coming soon in Zendikar Rising. We also got a really sweet hate Drake, I guess. Archon of Emeria. So 3 mana, 2/3 flying. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So this is essentially a Rule of Law, which is a pretty solid sideboard card that sees play all the way back to Modern at least, combined with part of Thalia Heretic Cathar. You don't get creatures, but you do stop non-basic lands to slow down your opponent as they're developing their mana. I think this is actually a pretty effective hate bear, especially for older formats. That's where I'm most excited about this, where you can play this in green-white creature style decks, Abzan creature style decks with Collected Company, Court of Calling, find it really consistently, and then you have a Rule of Law to shut down big turn combo decks, Storm style decks, Ad Nauseam style combo decks that you can actually tutor up with all your creature stuff, which makes it way, way better than a more traditional Rule of Law effect coming attached to an enchantment. As far as standard is concerned, I'm not sure exactly what this hits on. I think my best guess is you just play it in like a white aggro deck, maybe a Boros aggro deck, white X aggro, and I mean, maybe slow down your opponents a little bit with the spell ability, but definitely tax your opponent. Like in standard, especially with all these new flip lands that people are probably going to be playing, even making your opponent play a land or 2 tapped can slow down their removal, can slow down their wrath by a turn. And if you're playing an aggro deck, sometimes that 1 turn is just all you need. 1 extra turn to get in that attack and close out the game. So Archon of Emeria, I think this is a pretty powerful hate effect. I think I'm mostly excited for it for older formats, like Modern, maybe Pioneer as well, but I think it could have a place in Standard as well. Just slowing down your opponents long enough while you're playing aggro to get in those attacks, kill your opponent before they wrath your board or otherwise disrupt your plans. Next on our list, we have Coralhelm Chronicler, a blue rare from the set. 3 mana, 2/2 Merfolk Wizard. Whenever you kick a spell, you get to draw a card, discard a card. So you get to loot, and then whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to look at your top 5 cards, snag a kicker card from among them, put it in your hand, rest go at the bottom. So Coralhelm Chronicler, meh, this feels like a bulk rare to me. I don't think it's actually going to be playable. If anything, I'm a little sad because the main kicker commander we have is Hauler the Firefletcher, and Coralhelm Chronicler is not in the right colors. I really wish this was in Halar's colors so you could play a commander at least. As far as Standard is concerned, I don't know. I think it's more of a limited card, where in Limited is pretty good. Like, looting is good in Limited, grabbing a card with the enter the battlefield trigger is good. I guess maybe some sort of like Jace deck could use it in Standard to find Jace, but really, I think this is just mostly a Limited only card, casual deck style card, but not something that's actually going to show up in competitive decks in Standard. Speaking of competitive decks, one card I really do like is Inscription of Abundance. This card is really strong. 2 mana, instant speed, choose one, put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature, target player gains S life where X is the greatest power among creatures that player controls, or fight a creature. However, it has kicker of 3, so if you cast this for 5 mana, you can choose any number, 2 counters, fighting, and the life gain. And the reason I'm excited for this is this card is relatively on curve no matter how you play it. If you think about how this works, maybe the best comparison is like Dromoka's command, where you're able to get multiple modes with the fighting and the +1/+1 counter. If you look at what this compares to though, like just look at the individual modes of Inscription of Abundance. 2 +1/+1 counters at instant speed, that normally costs around 4 mana in Standard, something like Dragon Scale Boot. So that's a huge discount. Like just that ability, 2 mana for 2 +1/+1 counters, that is already undercosted on Inscription, all by itself with no other upside. If you look at instant speed fighting, those are often 2 mana, so you're already paying an on-curve price for the fighting ability. The life gain ability, whatever, that's just a nice bonus. So all of the modes, except maybe the life gain, which is still fine, like it's hard to cost that one, but all of the modes are either on curve or above the curve for what they do by themselves, and then you buy this upside where you can do them all together, and when you do them all together, it's going to be very powerful. So I feel like Inscription of Abundance feels like a pretty playable card. I think there's a question as to where does it fit in Standard. We have like mono green stompy decks, probably still be around after rotation, maybe Gruul. There is Primal Might, which has become a popular go-to pump spell / removal spell for those decks. Is Inscription of Abundance better than Primal Might in something like mono green stompy? Oh, it's going to be tough. I'm leaning towards yes, but we're going to have to wait and see. You get more immediate value and more efficiency out of Inscription. However, Primal Might, sometimes you flood out and just make a creature like a 10/10 and smash your opponent to death. You don't get that upside with Inscription, but I think Inscription, it's actually really good, and I'm excited to see if there's a whole cycle of these cards. I would guess yes, and the way they are costed, they feel very playable, and I don't think it's impossible that they're even playable in older formats. Like, the command cycle, Dromoka's command, Atarka's command, those cards show up in Modern even, in Pioneer as well. I think the Inscription cycle, assuming it is a cycle, definitely has a shot to show up in older formats as well, depending on the abilities. We also got, oh boy, Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats, and I really love this card. I know I've been skeptical of the party mechanic, because it feels win more, but Zagras is a huge exception. So 6 mana 4/4, costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Flying, Death Touch, Haste, other creatures you control have Death Touch. When a creature you control deals combat damage to a planeswalker, destroy it. So the reason I am so hyped from Zagras is this is a party focused creature that doesn't really need to be a party to be good. All you really need is 1 additional party member to get Zagras down to 5 mana, and you already have something that is similar-ish to like Stormbreath Dragon, a staple of its Standard format, still sees play in Modern. Glorybringer sees play in Modern, Pioneer, staple of Standard, like a 5 mana 4/4 flying haste with additional upsides. That is traditionally a very playable card. So all you need is 1 party member to make Zagras good, and if you ever get this to 4 mana, or God forbid 3 or 2 mana, it is insane. Like, this card at 2 mana or 3 mana is absolutely bonkers. So if you just accidentally have more party members, then Zagras becomes, I don't even know, an incredibly powerful card. So I think what I'm picturing with this card is just like curving it out. Like, I don't want to play a party deck with this card. I just want to like play a Rankle and then play this for 5 mana after it. Like, that seems like a really strong curve in and of itself. If you want to go more janky, we do have Hooded Blightfang in Standard, so you can try to play, I don't know, Death Touch Tribal with Zagras giving all your creatures Death Touch, so then they're all getting that Hellrider Drain ability, plus you're doubling up on the Planeswalker removal, which is a nice upside. That's the other big upside with Zagras, is some Planeswalkers we have in Standard, Ugin, Teferi, Nahiri, quickly get up to a pretty high loyalty, which can make them hard to beat down with creatures. Zagras, you only need a single attack with a single creature, assuming Zagras is on the battlefield, to take down Ugin. Your random 1/1 can get in that attack, take down Ugin, plus Zagras itself says it can come down with haste, is a great Planeswalker assassin. So not only is it good at assassinating your opponent's life total, it's also good at taking down Planeswalkers, which I think makes Zargoth a really strong card. So Zargoth, the upside is you don't need a party. Zargoth don't care about a party. All it needs is like 1 or 2 friends to get its cost down into that like 5 mana range. It's very strong. 4 or less mana, it is insane. So don't think of this as a party deck card. Think of it as, can I get this to 5 or 4 mana? If you can, Zargoth is a really, really good card. Next up in bulk rare land, we have Relic Robber. So Relic Robber, 3 mana 2/2 with haste, Goblin Rogue. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player makes a 0/1 colorless Goblin construct artifact creature token with it can't block, and at the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 1 damage to you. So, I mean, essentially, if you'd hit your opponent and start giving them those tokens, they're going to start taking damage every single turn. The problem is, a 2/2 for 3, even with haste, it's just not especially efficient. I think the stats on Relic Robber are just not quite good enough, so I think this is probably just a random unplayable bulk rare, with one big exception, and that exception is, what I'm excited to do with this card is add it to the Daggerbird deck that we've been trying to rebuild in Historic. If you're not familiar with Daggerbird, the name comes from Dowsing Dagger, which is a equipment that gives your opponent some tokens when it comes into play. But the main idea of the deck is to use cards like Dowsing Dagger, Relic Robber, Clackbridge Troll to give your opponents tokens while also burning your opponent with those tokens with things like Rampaging Frosinod, Trespasser's Curse, and then using like Massacre Worm to kill all the tokens and drain your opponent out of the game. So it's like this really weird give your opponent token burn deck. I will definitely play Relic Robber there. The deck is very hungry for anything that can create a token under your opponent's control. Relic Robber, while I don't think it's great, it is a card that can put a token into play under your opponent's control, which makes it perfect for the deck. So my guess is basically unplayable but fun card. Obviously, like, it can snowball. Maybe you can bring it in against control and hit the control player a few times, give him a few tokens, burn him out of the game, kind of like we see Legion Warboss now in Standard. Maybe it's that sideboard card that you can bring in those matchups, but really, I think it's just a little bit too underpowered power and toughness wise for its mana cost to really be a good Standard card. We also got couple more box toppers. I think we're to the end of them, or very close. Creeping Tar Pit, Grove of the Bird Willows, 2 really more sweet pieces of art, very playable cards. So very nice box toppers to round out the set. In the world of lower rarity cards, we got Emeria Mystic, which is essentially We Dragonauts with the upside of also triggering when wizards are cast. So I guess technically a strictly better We Dragonauts outside of its fairy versus merfolk creature types. We also got a couple of sweet party cards, Deadly Alliance and Thwart the Grave. So Deadly Alliance, 5 mana removal spell for a creature or planeswalker, 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. This one, at 4 mana it's okay. At 3 mana, it's good. At less than 3 mana, it's incredibly solid. So keep that in mind. Again, you don't need a full party to make this work. If you have a couple of party members to get the cost down, it can be a good card. Thwart the Grave, I'm actually kind of excited about this one. 6 mana, 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Return a creature and essentially 1 party member, a cleric, rogue, warrior, wizard, from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this takes and reanimates 2 creatures creatures for 6 mana. That's the worst case. Yes, there's a little restriction with the creature type thing, but if you look at Ever After was a rare that reanimated 2 creatures for 6 mana. Thwart the Grave, in theory, if you're playing some sort of party deck, can be 5, 4, 3, even 2 mana. It can get really, really cheap. I think this card is actually super powerful. One of the more powerful reanimation spells we've seen in a long time. Like, reanimating 2 creatures for 6 mana is already on par for rares that we've seen in the not that distant past, so any discount is going to make this card very strong. Like, 2 creatures for 5 mana is really good. 4 mana is insane. Anything less than that is like broken. So keep this one in mind. Yes, you do have to be playing party members to get the full impact of the reanimation, but when you consider that reanimating a single creature usually costs 5 mana in standard, it's hard to see how Thwart the Grave cannot be the best reanimation spell Wizards has printed in standard in quite a long time. We also got some more flip cards. Spikefield Dangers, Zoph's Feeding, Tangled Fluorohedron. These are all uncommon flip cards. So the backside, tap for a mana of their color, come into play tap. The front side, I think Zoph's Feeding, the least powerful of the bunch. Yes, it can be kind of a finisher for a black deck, draining for 4, but a little bit expensive. Tangled Fluorohedron, actually pretty good. A 2-mana Mana Dork is kind of on par for standard. Plus, sometimes you'll play at land mode. And Spikefield Dangers, I actually really like this one. We've seen in formats like Modern and Specific, 1 damage actually does a lot. We see like Lava Dart being a staple of that format. Spikefield Dangers gives you an extra spell that is also a land. Yes, it does come into play untapped. So I think if I was to rank these in playability, it's probably something like Tangled Fluorohedron, then Spikefield Dangers, and then Zoph's Feeding. Although, I mean, I think this mechanic is still really strong. Not as good as a Mythic we talked about earlier because they come into play tapped, but still a really strong mechanic. We also got Feed the Swarm. You probably know how I feel about this one. I don't like black being able to kill enchantments. Maybe I'm the old man yelling at the clouds. Maybe I'm too much of a traditionalist, but I just don't think black should be able to kill enchantments. And this is, by far, the best black enchantment removal we've ever seen. 2 mana sorcery, destroy a creature or an enchantment your opponent controls. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. This is essentially like Vendetta, which is a playable-ish removal spell. Not a great removal spell, but it has seen a bit of play in the past. Combined with not quite Disenchant, because you don't get artifacts, but for 2 mana, like when Wizards said they were going to give black targeted enchantment removal, I assumed it had to come with a big cost, like lose half your life rounded up or something like that. What I did not expect is it to come attached to creature removal, to make it main deckable, and to have a relatively low cost. Like, lose life equal to permanent's converted mana cost. That is a relatively low cost for being able to do something that your color combination over 27 years of Magic has not been able to do. So, I don't know. To me, this feels like a color pie break. I don't like it, but let me know. Maybe I'm wrong. To convince me why Feed the Swarm is actually a card that we want running around in Magic. Obviously, the card's good. Like, it's going to be a commander staple, giving your mono black decks way to deal with enchantments. It's powerful because it's something that black can't do, so it's going to be very, very strong. The only option that really exists for target enchantment removal in black, so expect tons of black commander decks to play it, black-red Rakdos commander decks to play it, standard decks to possibly play it, and maybe even other formats as well, depending on the metagame. Like, if your mono black rack deck can't beat Leyline of Sanctity in Modern, this is your go-to. Like, this is the option that you can bring in and be able to deal with it. Plus, you get the bad creature removal attached to it. So this card is very, very strong. Stronger than I expected when Wizards said they were moving targeted enchantment removal to black. We also got just a million lower rarity cards. We've already talked about so many cards. We can't go over all these individually. A bunch of stuff for limited, some sweet stuff to dig through, but you can check them all out over at MTGPreviews.com. Anyway, I believe that brings us to the end of our daily Zendikar Rising spoilers for today. So many insane cards. So let me know what you think. How busted is the Mythic Flipland Emeria's Call? Like, how good is that card? How good is that mechanic? What do you think about Angel of Destiny? How practical is it to kill people by getting up to 45 life in standard? Nighthawk Scavenger, the best vampire Nighthawk of all time. What about that one? How about Shatter, our new edict that gets big things? Roiling Vortex, can that see play even though Fires of Invention is already banned? Taborax, our sacrifice demon, what is that one going to do in standard or other formats? Maul of the Skyclave, our new equipment. How about Coralhelm Chronicler? Am I missing anything there? Our new black Disenchant. All these ridiculous cards. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about more new Zendikar Rising spoilers. Until then, have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.